Hey class, I'm just here to give you guys the demo for this coil pot project that we'll be doing. You remember we are referencing Maria Martinez and her techniques on how to make a coil pot. We have our own particular ways and techniques of doing it with the tools and materials that we have at our school. So this is how we do it. To start, what you'll need to do is just go back on the slab roller, just like you did in the first project. Do a 1/2 inch slab. So kind of pancake a ball down a little bit. Roll it through the slab roller, maybe just a little over a pound. Get about this size of a slab so that you can create a base for your slab or coil pot. What we do from here is usually create some sort of circular base, and something about this size would be perfect. Anything bigger kind of creates too big of a base and too big of a coil pot. So I recommend something about this size, maybe 4 or 5 inches long. So we put that down to create the base, and then use a fettling knife to cut straight down so those edges are nice and straight, and create a nice circular base for yourself here. Just like that. Take away your extra clay and that lid. You could use that later. And then from here, I highly recommend working on a banding wheel so that you can easily add coils and work up from here. We're going to actually set this aside now for a minute, and I want to talk about making coils first, and then we'll go back to that slab. And to do so, what I would do is grab another pound and a half of clay, get it into a large coil shape, and to get started, have a clean table, and just work from the center out wide. I always have my palms going over the top of the coil from the center, and then they naturally go out to the side once this gets long enough. So what you need to kind of keep an eye on is certain areas getting a little thicker or thinner than others, and then always fixing those sooner than later. If you don't pay attention to those, they'll become a problem down the road. But once this gets a little bit longer, you can nicely start from the center, and your hands just naturally move to the outside. Might be easier to stand up, apply even amount of pressure across the whole thing. And then my biggest trick that's worked for me is if this ever gets too oblong or too kind of oval shaped, what I recommend, stand it up and then square it out. Square out all your sides, and it's much easier to turn that square into a nice circular coil than it is to go from that oblong shape. So the first time you do this, it's going to be a challenge. It's not easy. Got to do a few practice coils before you commit to your one that you're going to put on your slab. But just be patient. Always start back in the middle, roll it out. Whenever you get a little too thick on the edges, just recommend cutting those off. You don't need it to be that long anyway. Probably just a little over a foot long each would wrap around that circle, or less. And just roll outwards. Can tell this side's a little thicker than the rest, so I might need to pay attention to that for a little bit. Cut off some of this end because I don't need that. And just try to get this coil to be as consistent thickness across the whole thing. We're aiming for something around a 1/2 inch thick, nothing more, nothing too less. Too thick will make it hard to control and add too much clay and too much weight to your pot. Too thin won't really make too much of a difference. So somewhere in that happy medium, something like this. And then you could bring your slab back into the picture. And this is where you just start adding your coils to your slab base via slipping and scoring. But one thing I like to do before I do that is show you how I get this lined up. So to get this lined up perfectly every time, I have another little trick that I overlap. Do some overlapping so that this coil fits perfectly. Overlap them like this, catch them in the middle, cut down the middle, remove that excess on the bottom and the top, and then those two should meet up perfectly on top of your slab. That first coil should sit right on top of your slab, and then here in a minute I'll show you what I would do next in terms of adding coils on top of that. From here, you should have done this already, but just slipping and scoring, add clay to clay. Anytime you're adding clay to clay, you got to slip and score. Across the whole thing on both the base and the coil. Try to get that really gritty so it grabs something and it really wants to stick down. Also make sure slip and score those ends, because once again those are touching each other, and whenever clay is touching clay we got to slip and score. Okay, now this can go on top, and we can get that all lined up. Should fit evenly again like we measured, and then you can use your best tool, which is just your hands, and you can pinch some of this clay either up or down, whatever works best, just so that we know that this is gonna stick and create ourselves a really nice structurally sound base. While you can too, I would just clean this out with your finger, but also on the inside, maybe get your finger wet and clean up those edges and get them stuck to each other. And we'll do this more in the future, but one thing you're going to want to do throughout this whole project is use ribs to clean up your edge. The more you can make this pot not look like it was hand built or made out of coils, the more impressive it will be. The goal is to try to make this look like it was thrown on the wheel, even though it wasn't. You can even pinch this clay up a little bit once it's nice and down securely, and that will gain your height every time. So even though you might be adding a coil that's a 1/2 inch, you probably can gain more than that just by pinching that clay up, and that way it's not so thick and you're really utilizing as much of that clay as possible. Okay, from here I recommend deciding your form, knowing what form you're going to go from here, and know if you're going to go outside or in, or have a plan for both. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do that, and I'm not going to slip and score because you know what that looks like, but you definitely should. But let's pretend like I want this pot to go outwards, like most of Maria Martinez's pots. They're vase forms, they have a belly at the bottom, they come in, and then they flare out again at the top. To do that, I'm just going to show you how to add a coil on the outside and how to add a coil on the inside. So there's my trick again. But it's really simple here. Is if I want it to go out, then this coil needs to be on the outside half edge, I guess I should say, of the previous coil. So this one's going to be a little longer, but I measured it for it that way. And you can see how it's going to slowly go out. Okay, I'm going to just pinch this down really quick, and you can see my marks. And I'll gain a little height this way too, just by pinching. And then from the inside too, I have some cleaning up to do and some coils. This is where you can really use the rib that you choose to smooth these edges out, get rid of those little thumbprint marks if you want them to go away, smooth out this whole base, and then every time you add a coil, you should really be doing this. Sometimes it's easier when it's wet, and you're just slowly building up this height and the form as you go. I would want to do that on the inside and out, especially while I can too. As this closes up, this will be harder, but I could get rid of those lines as much as possible. Whenever you can stop and clean this thing up, I would. You could use a sponge, you can use your hands or a tool, whatever seems right in that moment. I could probably pinch this up just a little more and utilize that clay and that gain that height. And then lastly, I want to show you how I would add a coil on the inside half of this. So if I were to be making this project like you guys are, I would want to continue to go out. I would go out a couple more coils, really create that belly and create some width. You got to be careful of that getting too wide, and sometimes that weight wants to sit down and collapse on itself if you don't do it right. But maybe a couple, 2 or 3 more coils to gain some more height and some more form going that way. And then I would probably want to start thinking about moving inward, so that's what I'm going to show. So I'm doing it a little prematurely just to save you time, but this is the same exact way, except for this time all I did was measure on the inside half of the previous coil. So this coil sitting on the inside half of the last coil I set down. Okay, so this one is gonna nicely smooth over from the bottom coil up, so you'll see me pinching that clay from the previous coil upwards. That's going to get each other stuck pretty good. It's going to gain me some height too, and I could do that again from the inside. And then, like I've done before this, go back to my rib, clean away those coil marks or handprint marks and lines that I've created. You can really start to make something that looks like it was made on the wheel. So you can really create something cool by going slow and slowly adding up height with coils and build up something with a great form, and that's our goal, is to make something with good form that is more interesting than just straight walls on both sides, but moves in and out a little bit and is interesting to look at. So always more to clean up, and you can imagine how this can slowly build up and I could finish my form, but it's basically the same thing. Every time you're adding a coil on the inside or outside edge, unless you want it to go straight up, then it can go directly on that last coil. But that's basically it until you're done. One last thing I would do is I'd grab a wood knife tool and I'd cut a 45-degree angle in this before I cut this off the banding wheel, put it on a bat to save. And I would do that every time I was done, but especially at the end to create a nice angle for myself when I go to glaze this. So wood knife tool at a 45-degree angle, cut that at the base. And that's it. Go ahead and get started, and let me know if you have any questions.